Thank you. I went ice fishing out on Saginaw Bay when it was 20 below zero, and I thought that was the dumbest thing I'd ever done involving fishing, but let me tell you, in this weather, to come out here and do this, you people are right up there with me on that. I appreciate the showing up. It is not that easy in life to find an unfailing source of joy. And Martha Gellhorn, she was Ernest Hemingway's third wife, and Ernest Hemingway's kids loved her. She was their favorite stepmother of, I guess there were 4 they had to pick from. But she liked to hunt and she liked to fish, and when they came to Hemingway's house, they could do whatever they wanted. This quote, for me, this is fishing. I like to catch fish, I like to clean fish, I like to eat fish, I like to read about them. So this is my unfailing source of joy. We moved here, I lived in Kalamazoo most of my life, then we moved to Vicksburg in 2001. And when I saw this postcard, I thought, I think I picked the right place, because if an old lady can catch that big a pike with a cane pole, I had a chance of maybe doing something. So it's titled Fishing in Vicksburg. Well, I thought I would just be doing this on Sunset Lake. Well, you can't do that, okay? The reason being, the headwaters for this water is on the west side of 131. They run into Little Sugarloaf, and then there's a drain that comes out. It also comes out of Long Lake, Austin Lake, well, Sugarloaf, Little Sugarloaf, and West Lake. That water comes down. I thought, well, how could that be connected? Well, they dug a drainage ditch, and I never noticed it before, but it runs right out, it goes underneath T Avenue, over there by Sprinkle Road. And the reason I got curious about that is because one winter, I caught a tiger muskie in Sunset Lake. And I asked everybody, how, they didn't plant them here. Why? And they said, well, they planted them in Austin Lake, I guess. And they just, springtime comes, that's one thing about pike, they love to run, as I'll prove. But anyways, I included this because we're just about here, okay? Everything in the white goes to the Kalamazoo River. Wow, that's great. Everything south runs into the St. Joe, okay? And the weird part is the water, the city of Portage is 24 feet higher than the village of Vicksburg. So if you go out and get in your kayak and you go on Sunset Lake and you head upstream, you only have to go up about a half mile. You get a pretty good current. You have to work at it. So the water's coming and it's turning over. I think the water here turns over every 7 days. Portage Lake, I think it's like,
yeah, that's what it is, 7 days.
About every 7 days. So you're getting new water in here once a week. It's not like 3 ponds in Kalamazoo that, you know, that's still same water I used to fish in 70 years ago. Okay, now there's 3 kinds of fishing that we need to think about. One is subsistence fishing, which is what the native people did. Then there's commercial fishing, which just about wiped out fishing in this state. And then there's sports and recreation, and I think that's what we do. I don't, any commercial fishermen here tonight? I don't think so. And when I say pre-1880, I mean like 2,000 years ago, okay? People have been here that long, and they've been catching fish to eat. Now, the Coves Apartments up there, this is not very good focus, but you can see, everybody knows where it is. It's on Sunset Lake, that little curve. And when they did that, they had to do environmental study, right, an architectural archaeological study to make sure they weren't going to disturb anything. Well, at that site they didn't disturb anything, but they found archaeological field work spring of 1984 downstream from the project, so just downstream from Sunset, near the head of Barton Lake, resulted in the discovery of 3 new prehistoric sites and confirmed the presence of a 4th on what had been the southeast margin of Gourd Neck Prairie. So what they're talking about is right, let's see, coming out here, W, okay. They're talking about right in here. This is Kiwis, and there's an elevator here. Well, all of this was a native village, at least 4 different sites. And some of them go back 800 years. They've been able to carbon date the charcoal. And this just more or less explains it, but it said in the year 1833, the Indians had a village or collection of wigwams in a grove just east of the prairie on the farm now owned by James N. Naismith. The Naismith farm in 1880 occupied the north half section of, or the north half 23, and from this village of Sagamaw's people, the residents hunted deer during most of the year, trapped raccoons and muskrats, fished the lakes and streams with spear and hook. Sagamaw is kind of an important person. Not a whole lot's been written about him, but every now and then something shows up that he's referred to. They are pretty sure he was at the Battle of the Thames fighting with Tecumseh in 1813. They're pretty sure he told the white people what Kalamazoo was. So, plus there's a little lake just north of here, named for him. I put the tribe locations in 1760 because 1760 is kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. It's before a large number of white people got here. We know the French were down on the north. They were in Mendon in the 1600s, 1680s. In fact, there's kind of a cool story about it. There was a priest that wanted to open a school there, and they wouldn't let him do it. They wanted him to go where there was a few more people. So he went downstream to a place called South Bend, and the school he opened, we know it today as Notre Dame. So I've always, what would life be like in Vicksburg if Notre Dame was 10 miles away, you know? The Potawatomis, they came here from the Atlantic Ocean, believe it or not. They got pushed out. They didn't get along with this sauger, the fox. The Winnebagos, I guess they were a pain. The Ojibways and the Ottawas and the Potawatomis, they were the 3 fires. Those 3 tribes intermarried, they stuck together. The Potawatomis were the keepers of the fire. In fact, I guess there's a casino now named Firekeepers Casino. The Ottawa were more the tradespeople. If you want to find really interesting artifacts, you want to go to an Ottawa village because you'll find mica from Tennessee, you'll find conch shells from the Gulf Coast, you'll find lead from Galena. These people did a lot of trading that we don't give them much credit for. They knew a lot more about the country than we thought. But and the Ojibwe, they were the people that defended the other 2 mainly. In fact, they used to get into it. You can see they're way over here. They used to get into it with the Sioux quite a bit, which I don't think would be too pleasant a way to spend a summer. But okay, Native American fishing methods, nets. The #1 way to catch fish around here historically has been nets. And what the native people used to do, they used to stretch them right across the creek, especially in the spring, because fish are moving upstream. There's a lot of pike that come out of Portage Lake up this far. I'm kind of anxious to see what's going to happen now that they've taken that spillway out at Clark Park. The pike will be able to make it up. There'll probably be a lot more pike in Sunset Lake. Hook and line, which obvious, spearing. They did the spearing mainly in the winter and in the spring, because especially in the winter, you could go out on the ice if you want something to do different, cut a hole, take your spear out, put the spear through the hole, put a tarp over the top of you, and you'll be amazed. It's like a dark house. I mean, a lot of guys go out in shanties, but it's the same kind of fishing. You run your decoy around when the pike come in, let them have it. Chemicals. That one really surprised me. I had no idea that native people would use chemicals to get fish, and traps.
What kind of chemicals would that be?
They used sumac leaves, and more importantly, they used roots of a pea plant. And today we call it retinone. The DNR uses it a lot when they want to poison off a lake. You know, like if it's full of stunted bluegills, they'll throw that on top and it cleans everything out. Seines are most popular around here. And they also use gill nets, but a seine, nothing gets through it, okay? I mean, and when you're fishing for dinner, when you're subsistence fishing, you want all the fish. They used the bark of tree bark for cords. They used nettle stalks. In fact, when the manufactured stuff came, when they started trading with the French and the British and the English, the twine was made out of cotton. And they didn't mind getting it, but it wouldn't last as long as the stuff they were making out of nettles and tree bark. So they found out a lot of times when they would trade with the native people, they would demand something more. You know, okay, well, if we take this stuff that's only going to last a year, you have to throw a copper pot in, or you have to throw in. And I read an account. It was way up in Mount Pleasant, and they were talking about how this chief or native gentleman was trying to work a deal, and the French were just going nuts. And then finally, they threw in a copper pot, and the guy looked at his wife, and she said, "Okay, well," so the women gathered the material, and the men wove the nets. There was very strict order of work, and that always tickled me because I thought I'd much rather weave a net than go out and pick out nettles. I mean, and again, it's just the idea. It's the most food for the least effort. You're not fishing for wall hangers or bragging rights. You're fishing for something to eat. All right, hook and line. All right, now people say, well, how could they have hooks? They didn't have metal. Well, they did have metal. It was copper, but that doesn't make a great fish hook, but it does make a great gorget, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But these are some of the hooks that they made. I brought this. Okay, it's May 1760. You've just moved your village from Lake Michigan back here. And they used to travel back and forth. They loved over there by the lake in the winter. It was pretty good hunting, and around here it was the fishing. And something else I'll tell you about. Well, so you're out, you're walking, and you find one of these. Well, most people would kick it out of the way. Man, this was gold, okay? Because you could make fishing lures, And you could also make spear points. And I wondered, well, how could you make a spear point out of this? Well, what they would do is they would cut it off here, they would sharpen this end, and this tine acted as a barb. So when you drove the spear in, the fish couldn't get away. They would get hung up on this. I found that last summer. I thought, what am I going to do with this? Well, then, fortunately, Mr. Cook asked me to give the talk so I could actually have I don't have to pitch it now. The gorges, when I first heard about this, I was like 12 years old, and I was just curious, how could this possibly catch a fish? Well, what I did was I made mine out of a turkey bone, sharpened both ends, put a night crawler on both ends, and went to Millen Park, threw it above the dam, and probably the dumbest sucker ever born ate that gorge. And I watched him. He took it in, and when he got it deep in his throat, I set the line, and he hooked him. It'll turn laterally inside. When native people got metal, they love that. In fact, you want to fish with this, you're going to catch bigger fish, okay? The small ones you won't get. Well, if you're fishing for food, you want bigger fish. Okay, now this part, you use this one for your spear point. This part right here, you can work and you can make these lures. Now, I was always curious, you know, they had fishing line, but they didn't have poles or anything. And I wondered, how would they do this? Well, a very, very nice Cree Indian explained to me what they would do is they would tie the line to this end of the lure. They'd get in their canoe. Let's say they were going from the south end of Portage Lake to the north end. You take about 5 strokes with your paddle, throw the lure over the side, and he said, usually by the time you get to the other end of the lake, you've caught dinner. And one of the nice things about catching them this way is that the fish is usually out of gas by the time you get to the other end of the lake, because he's been fighting the canoe and you. I know a lot of people it's not unusual to go to the boat harbor there in Saugatuck, and you look, a lot of people have a rig like this hooked up on their sailboats. So, okay, springtime at night with a torch. You go at night because it's a lot easier to see them. Winter through the ice. But a single point for sturgeon, trident for smaller fish. And I got thinking, sturgeon. Well, my mindset is 21st century. I can't imagine a sturgeon. Well, there were a lot of sturgeon around here. We have documented things up in Marshall. There were so many sturgeon that would come up the river, the farmers would pull them out of the water and use them in their fireplaces. They're so oily, they burn. We know that the sturgeons got up past Mendon because people were complaining, especially in the spring. Well, if you're going to spear a sturgeon, you definitely need a barb on your hook, because some of those things can go 100 pounds. And unfortunately, you know, as the 20th century went on, we lost a lot of this. Now, this is a decoy. You can forget these, but this is what the ice fishing decoy looked like. They would carve them. They would put a rope on them, and then you could just work the string, and the decoy would swim around the hole, and then when the pike would come in, or whatever. Okay, now, I wanted to show you this because this is stereotypical. If you have, just think about this. If you have a birch bark canoe, are you going to stand up in it? Probably not, you know. Well, we went up to the Zibigwe. It's the Ojibwe museum up in Mount Pleasant. And I said something to if you get a chance, go up there. It's fantastic. They have the best displays. They're you think you're going into a village. I mean, it's incredible. Well, anyways, I said something about this. The guy started laughing. He says, well, you know, in the 1850s and somebody had to illustrate a magazine article, what's more dramatic? Same thing here. If you're going to spear, you're not going to go out in the middle of the lake because the fish aren't that close to the surface. Okay? And this guy has a bow and arrow, and he said, probably this might be the most practical, but he said, if you miss, you can break an arrow. And, you know, and you figure it takes about 2 hours to make a flint tip. You know, that's a lot of time invested for no return. So, I won't use that yet. Traps. This was the simplest way. Okay, my very explicit diagram here. These are stones in the middle of the stream. Okay, the current goes this way. When the fish run upstream in the spring, this funnels them right into a spot here, and this is where you're going to stand with your spear, and you'll take them as they come through. And then after the fish ran up, they would close this off. They'd throw a brush or something in there, and the fish couldn't get back downstream. So you were pretty sure of having a pretty good meal. The chemicals, we talked about these. I mean, now we would shudder to think that somebody would throw something in the river like the green dye in Chicago on St. Patrick's Day, which they continue to do. I don't know why, but anyways. But the retinone is pretty potent stuff. And the sumac leaf, I actually tried that when I was about 72. I wasn't as smart as I am now. It works. Don't do it. The DNR really frowns on that. Okay, commercial fishing and time of abuse. And this is kind of a sad time. We know the passenger pigeons are extinct. The graylings, we don't have them anymore in Michigan. They're trying to bring them back. Lake Michigan sturgeon, they went away. If you want a sturgeon now, you usually have to go over to Lake Huron, especially the St. Clair River. I guess that's going to be a pretty good place. Lake Huron herring. I used to teach school up in the thumb, right on the tip of the thumb. And there was a town up there named Port Crescent. And they used to mine a lot of sand up there. And they would send that down to Detroit, and that's what they used to line the foundries with. That's when they made auto parts. Well, before that, it was all timber. And then 1871, 1881, they had two big forest fires up there. Well, before that, they would lumber, they'd send it to the sawmill, and they ended up with a whole lot of unused timber. It's real hard to get fresh water up there because it floats on salt water. There's a lot of brine. So what they did was they were trying to figure out some way they could make some money on this. Well, the lake was full of herring. So what they would do is they'd catch all the herring they could, they'd put them in barrels made out of scrap wood. Then they also used the scrap wood to boil down the brine to get the salt. They'd fill the barrels. You could put them on a boat and you could send them to New York or Chicago, and people were thrilled to get them. The problem was they caught them all. I really tried hard one summer. Of course, this was 50 years ago. And I could not catch one. And I really tried as hard as I could. Well, I guess this past spring, they started showing up in DNR surveys. So maybe they're coming back. Turkeys, I always feel kind of sorry for turkeys because I thought that they were a beautiful bird and everybody should keep them. And then one day I watched my neighbor, Dave Weinberg, plant a field. And as he put the corn down, the turkeys came out of the woods and dug it up just as fast as he could put it in the ground. And I thought, I think I know why turkeys went extinct around these parts. Cranes are the same way. They're more destructive than turkeys in a plowed field. And white-tailed deer, I guess we were down to like 10,000. We're up, what, millions now. But in 1966, I went deer hunting. And that year, the only thing I could write, and I'm talking about like Gordon State game area stuff, the only thing I could write in my journal, I saw one set of tracks. And that was so important that I actually saw deer tracks, you know. Well now, my God, you're swatting them off with a... So that's a comeback story. These are the commercial fishing boats. This one, they actually use traps, but this one, you can see these are gill nets, these are seines. The gill nets get the bigger fish, the seines get the smaller ones. And they just about decimated a lot of population of fish. Plus, the Welland Canal, which lets people bypass Niagara Falls, that didn't do us any favors either because well, that's how the lamprey got in. It's a lot of invasive species, the gobies, the zebra mussels. I've even seen zebra mussels down on Portage Lake. I mean, how did they get down there? Okay, 1875, 2019, fishing and recreation is sport. And this is probably more of what we do. And 1875 is an incredibly important date because that's when everything changed. The Michigan legislature, they decided that people were complaining there weren't any fish to catch and there wasn't anything to hunt. So they decided, well, we need to put some restrictions in. So they came up with some laws. There were no laws before this. If you went out and you caught 200 perch, those were your fish, you know, no questions. They came up with rules like length of fish, quantity of fish, seasons for fish, and that really put off a lot of people because, you know, what do you mean I can't catch bass after December 1st until Memorial Day? That's crazy. You know? There were some, and you had to have a license. Okay, and people, well, thank God it was during the progressive era of the end of the 19th century because people went, okay, I'll do it, but I'm not happy about it. Developments that helped, well, it was the start of the DNR. It was people, we consciously managed wildlife, okay? It wasn't, there were some developments that were detrimental too. And again, unfortunately, I have to say DNR because somebody had this brilliant idea that we needed these fish to catch that we didn't have native, and it was the carp, German carp. And they dropped those fish all over this state, and the carp did very, very well. My first experience at Barton Lake, I was about 12 years old. I was with my cousin Jack, and we launched a boat, and we went east end of the lake. And I never saw so many fish in my life. I was so pumped. I'm getting my pole, and he said, relax. He said, those are carp. And man, I thought I'm going to get 25-pound, well, I could have, I guess. Okay, where to fish in the village of Vicksburg in 1875? Well, number one is Sunset Lake, and the number two is Lake Vicksburg. And Lake Vicksburg was bigger than Sunset Lake. Anybody here remember it? Probably not. Okay, it gets its name in 1886 because somebody was, well, I don't even know if people remember Sue Moore, but this is one of her ancestors, and she named the lake. Now, this is a map of Vicksburg in about 1860, and they do some things here that are hard to figure out, like this railroad should be up here, number 2. I don't think there weren't two bridges. This is Prairie Street running here. Where we're at is right about here, and this is the Grand Rapids and Indiana Railroad. But this gave me a big clue. Why is that there? Well, that's Lake Vicksburg. This explains, blah, blah, blah. The evolution of the impoundment is Portage Creek, which we all know. But Lake Vicksburg, this was in the 1930s, and I feel bad, it's Mrs. William Schaefer, and I know William wasn't her first name, but that's what I had to go by. This guy named John D. Armand, he was from Nova Scotia, came to Vicksburg, built a boat, and launched it on Lake Vicksburg. This body of water covered the area from the railroad tracks at the rear of the administration building on Kalamazoo Avenue east to Wilson Street, north to State Street, and south to near Highway Street, or W Avenue. She didn't supply a date, but the lake doesn't show up on 1873 map of the village. So it existed before then. In fact, where that's located, I eyeballed it the other day. It's about 120 acres. Well, that's a pretty good sized lake. I know a lot of people would put $2 million homes on something like that. But one dock was on Prairie Street. The other one was near Highway Street, and he would give you a ride for 25 cents for adults, 10 cents for children. Over the years, the lake turned into a swamp and a marsh, and eventually was drained completely. At the time, Highway Street High School athletic field, I never heard it called that before, but in the 1950s, when they redid Highway Street, they found some cedar logs, and they used to make what they called a corduroy road, and they would take those logs and they would put them, and that's the only way you could get through the soft ground or the bog. And we had those logs here at the Historical Society for a while. And it contained, again, large pickerel. Okay, I did the math, and if I took my wife and my 3 kids on a trip on, the equivalent would have been about $15. So I don't, the guy, he only had to take people out a couple times a week, and he did all right. Okay, this is the Grand Rapids and Indiana Railroad, and they called it the fishing line. And the reason they called it the fishing line was because you could get on, that's supposed to be Fort Wayne, but anyways, and the people that, the Grand Rapids and Indiana Railroad people, they had a railroad that ran from up Mackinac all the way down. Well, unfortunately, from about here up, they cut everything down. There was no reason to go up there unless you want to look at tree stumps and sand. So they came up with this idea that come up and go fishing there. The lakes are still there. Well, the places up north, they didn't really benefit at the beginning, but around here they really did. There were a lot of cases where mom and dad and the kids would get on the train, they would head north. Dad would bring his fishing pole, they would drop mom off and the kids down here right just south of town where it says, "Welcome to Vicksburg." And that was where the spiritualist camp was. And people would, women and kids would spend a week there. Dad would go on to Lemon Park, all these places on Indian Lake, and he would fish. And then when they were done at the spiritualist, they would, there were 3 taxis in Vicksburg in 1890. And I thought, how could there? Well, it's because there were people going back and forth. People were going to spiritualist camp. They'd stay at the hotel downtown. They didn't want to walk back almost a mile, or if they had to get out to Indian Lake. And I read one account where one of the guys, they asked him, why did you come up with a taxi in Vicksburg? And he said, well, I used to rent the wagons out, but about every other guy that would rent the wagon, he'd just keep going. I'd get my wagon back, it'd be in Muskegon or, so he decided to drive them himself and then charge people. And that particular guy, he used to get $1 to go from here out to Indian Lake. Well, it's a little pull, but that would have been about $20 for a taxi fare, which is about what you get off the. It's about what you pay now. So, well, anyway, so they used to make two stops in Vicksburg, and fishing was. Well, this is a complete aside, but it just fascinates me. Why was this going on in 1900? Well, in 1900, Good Housekeeping magazine, they were huge then, and they polled people about 4 trends they could see for the country. And the number 1 trend, obviously, I think, was the automobile. Boy, I wish I had one of those, The second thing was the bicycle, because that was a great way to travel around. And I thought, why would bicycle? Well, in 1900, there were so many bicycles in Vicksburg, they were proposing an ordinance to outlaw them from the village because there were so many people riding bikes. The third thing was spiritualism. And the fourth thing, I would never have guessed, ping pong, table tennis. They thought it was going to sweep the country. Oh, well. This is a little better drawing, so you can see the connections. I mean, if you were in Evanston, Indiana, and you wanted to go fishing at Indian Lake, you could be here in 8 hours. And that's without having to stop for gas or, all that. In fact, in 1918, my grandfather, he had a farm over by Lakota, Michigan, over by South Haven. And he worked for Crescent Engraving in Kalamazoo. Well, Crescent Engraving was going to do a picnic, company picnic. And my grandmother wanted to go. Well, she got on the train at Grand Junction. They rode the train to Kalamazoo, did a transfer. They did a spur line that went out to Pickerel Lake. And they rode out. She left at 8 o'clock in the morning. She was here at 10:30 in the morning. Stayed for the day, got back on the train. She was back in Lakota before dark. I mean, now you try doing that in a car today, and I'd challenge you. Well, anyways, so all of these railroads that connected, you could get on and then come right on up to the straits. In fact, well, you can see the tracks right out there. I mean, you could almost reach out and touch a train when it went by. Okay, this is Munn's Resort, and there's a great book we have in the Historical Society library, and several women went around the lake and collected stories from people that lived there. There was a native man, there was a Potawatomi Indian, and he came to Indian Lake every year until like 1920 and built his wigwam right on the shore, right about where the railroad comes in on the north end there. And to me, that's just amazing. 100 years ago, Indians were still coming to Indian Lake. Well, anyways, there's a story about this excursion boat, and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. You'd take trips on the lake. No, they had to put that in because Munns was arguing with the other resort, the one just north, and he wouldn't, well, so people would get off the train, he wouldn't let them walk across his property to get to Munns. So Munn had to run this boat. You had to get on the dock. Well, it kind of added romance to your weekend, but that was why the boat was there. Oh, this is the wrong, yeah. That wasn't the Nazarene camp, that was Lemon Park. It was, but I love these two pictures. This guy and this guy are the same people. And these two guys are brother-in-laws. And this Irwine, his daughter, Russell Irwine only had one child, it was a daughter. And until about 1970, she was living over by Gordneck Lake, just off Portage Road there. But I love this picture because this guy, when I looked him up, I thought, well, maybe he's a farmer or something. No, this guy was a medical doctor. They were just clowning. I mean, this was they were just having fun with us. But because you can see how he dressed when he caught a nice fish. That fish, I did the math, or I tried to do the math. That fish is 22 inches long or longer, which means he's at least 7.5 pounds. And you don't catch many that size anymore. Okay, the Lee Paper Company Fishing Contest. This I just had the most fun with because we have every newsletter from the Lee Paper Company and the Historical Society. Every month in the summer, there was an article in there about the fishing contest. And as I read them, I thought, man, what a Vicksburg was a cool town, and the Lee Paper Company was a nice place to work. And then in the 70s, the newsletter changed. Well, I realized it changed because they'd sold it. You know, it became part of a bigger thing. Because like, if you read the newsletters from 1942 to 1972, it's like Mary Jane Williams' daughter got married this weekend. Bill Thomas's son is home from Michigan State University. You know, all those kind of little newsy things. Well, they went away after 72, but it's still fun to follow it because, yeah, this page is blank. It took me a while to find the rules. There weren't many rules. It's like Australian rules football. You know, they're just, what are they doing out there? Just beating each other up. Well, fishing, you had to work at Lee Paper Company. You had to catch the fish in season, and you had to have it measured, which created a problem because the poor guy that was in charge of the fishing contest, every other month he'd put a notice in the newsletter, do not call me at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. Do not bring a fish to my house at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. You know, put it in the freezer, do something, but don't bring it to me. This is a picture of the 1950 contest. And, you know, this was a prestigious thing because the winner got a new fishing pole or a tackle box or something. I had a list of names that goes along with this. There was one guy, he always caught the big trout. There was another guy who always caught the big pike. There was two women that always caught the big perch. And the rule I didn't include was, you know, when they said it had to be caught around here. Well, these two women, they would go up to their cabin up by Baldwin, and then they would fish all winter, and they'd catch these big perch, and then they'd bring them home just in time for opening day of the fishing contest at the paper mill, and they'd put a number up that nobody could touch, you know. But and I wish I had the page with the names, but Kimball Lake I mean, if you have a friend on Kimball Lake, nurture that friendship, because it's a good place to fish, and it's really hard to get to. It took my wife and I about, 5 hours in a kayak, because we had to come all the way up Barton Lake. We had to portage over Bloody Run, and then up through, and well, anyways, 3 guys caught 44 pounds of pike in one day in Kimball Lake. And from what I understand, they put it in the newsletter, and like the next day, everybody was giving them dummy slaps, because you do not tell anybody about the great pike fishing in Kimball Lake, and which I guess I just did. But those are 5-pound pike. I mean, 8-pound pike. Those are big fish, and they caught them all in one day. That's just amazing. Okay, now in this area, we are very lucky in that these 3 companies were here, because it made sure that we could get a lot of fishing equipment, and it was pretty reasonably priced. Bronson Reels down in Bronson, Michigan, there isn't one thing left. The building, the factory is gone. I mean, it's just I went and checked. There's nothing there. But in 1955 to 1965, they made more fishing reels than anybody else in the world. And I wondered, well, you know, I've heard of Bronson fishing reels. Well, they made fishing reels for Kmart. They made fishing reels for Ward's. They made fishing reels for Sears. If you have a Ted Lewis or Ted Williams closed-face fishing reel, it was made in Bronson, Michigan. And then about in the early 60s, they got the idea, well, maybe we ought to just put our own name on this, you know, instead of wholesale them out. And their main thing was reels. Hedden down in Dowagiac, and if you get a chance, go to that museum. It is the greatest fishing museum I've ever been in, because the people there, they have every Hedden lure ever made. And they will walk you around and explain everything to you. The problem is it's only open like, one Sunday a month, but go, because it's worth it. And then Shakespeare in Kalamazoo. Now, what you have to understand is you can forget reels, lures, and rods, because Bronson made rods or made reels for Hedden. Hedden made lures for Shakespeare. Shakespeare made rods for Hedden and Bronson. I mean, there was a lot of mix and match. And then about 1966, that symbiotic relationship kind of had to go away, because we were the Japanese, the Taiwanese, you know, a lot of Asian stuff came in, and they could make it cheaper than we could. So that's the main reason Bronson Reels went away. They weren't willing to or able to diversify into other products. Because I know, my gosh, Shakespeare, they made antennas for radios and golf clubs and bows, and you know, they were. Okay, now, this was made in Vicksburg. And if you find one, hang on to it, because this is the only one that was ever carved, from what I hear. So if you find another one, you've made earth-shaking history, I think. But these are the people we need to know. William Strong, he invented the weedless hook here in Vicksburg. Carson Durkee, he came up with gearing for fishing reels that the Daiwa people were very nice to borrow after his patent ran out. Lee Jacobs, and he's the godfather. It's how he made his living, was tying flies, selling lures. He was a taxidermist. And Dave Reinfeld, I included him. He's an artist. He lives out by T Avenue. I found him through the Fly Fishing Consortium. And Jim Hamrick, he lives on Portage Lake, and I included him as a local celebrity because, well, I should have the pictures. I'm not. Okay, this is the weedless hook that Eddie came up with, and apparently he was a barber, because the article says he had time between customers to come up with this. But he used, it was metal, and one way the people got around his patent was that they used a heavy nylon.
Yeah, there's pictures of Eric catching 2 big pipes and
Yeah, right.
pass it.
Yeah, pass it around. This is him with his fish, because it was when I looked at the South County News, he was there with his fish, with his granddaughters. They had a couple of big crappies they caught. And then I got that in the mail that afternoon, and I looked at it, holy cow, this guy's internationally famous. And there's the gearing for the reel. And the way I understand it, that gearing, if you have a Daiwa reel casting, one of the big problems was backlash. I mean, you really have, before they put the magnets in, you had to run everything with your thumb. You had to control the out, the in, all that stuff. This gearing allowed you to throw it out with magnets, and then when your bait hit the water, the magnets would come out and stop the backlash. And so they didn't put the magnets in the reel until they could use the gearing, and they couldn't use the gearing until the patent ran out. So you and I had a lot of backlashes. Thank you very much, Daiwa. Okay, Lee Jacobs, he was noted for his fly rod lures, but he made a couple of highly collectible wooden lures, the horsefly and the polyfrog, patented in 1830 to 1841. The horsefly, I hope this one has pictures. His business was at 126 South Main, and he took the partition out. He didn't tell the village of Vicksburg. He took the partition out so that that street number kind of vanished. But he needed a storefront. Okay. This is it. This collar is made out of metal, and it's very fragile. This lure works like crazy. The front piece spins, and the back piece wiggles. And usually that's hard to get a lure to do. The problem was, if you catch a fish over 2 pounds and he hits that, a bass will just crush the metal, and a pike will rip it right off. But if you collect lures, you really want this. If you fish, not so much. And this is the one that, if you say Vicksburg, you say Lee Jacobs. This is what people think of. Check your attic, because if you got one of these, it's the last time I at auction, it went for $600. And if you have this, the box and the directions are worth more than the lure. Yeah. So, and I've got to believe there's some out there someplace, because I gave this presentation in 2019, and when I finished, this guy, he had a box full of this stuff. I don't know, maybe he sold them, retired, I don't know, but I was just stunned to see it. And then at the Historical Society, we have a ton of these. He used to have them mounted in a box, a lot of boxes, or that's not what I mean, display cases. And he kept them at the barber shop. Well, one day a guy asked if he could borrow one. He was doing a presentation for him. I said, yeah, sure, take them. He never brought them back. So after that, he said, no, nothing gets loaned out. It's lock and key. But when he passed away, he gave them all to the Historical Society. So if you have time and you're curious and you want to see some pretty interesting things, I know it gave me ideas for a couple lures. Well, actually, I stole the ideas. I didn't, but he used this for bass, and it had a spinner in the front, and then it had a floating like body in the back. It was cork, and it rode higher in the water. Now they call them buzz baits, but he was making these back in the, well, late 20s. And I guess he passed away in the 60s. And he had to quit making these because his eyesight went bad. But this is one of the flies. You can see the inside of the historical center. The photographer didn't check his background very carefully. And this one is weighted. This is lead. And these are streamer feathers. So when you throw it out, it goes right to the bottom, and then you can jerk it back in. And apparently, he used, from what I hear, they used this on the Portage River. And that's what comes out of Indian Lake. And believe it or not, there are a lot of smallmouth bass in that water. It's just really hard to get to because you can't kayak because you get too far south of Indian Lake. There's a lot of stuff in the water. I guess you could get through, but it'd take you all day. I live on YZ, and Ronnigan's is just up the road from us. And every spring I see these kids, they're fishing on the bridge right there at Ronnigan's. And one day we were walking, I stopped and said, "You guys catching anything?" They pulled a stringer up. They must have had 6 smallmouth on there. They were all pretty nice fish. So. And this is, well, it was kind of a bucktail deal, but I think he used elk hair. He used to use polar bear fur. Now, I don't know where you get that. You'd probably go to jail if you even own it, but he tied a lot of stuff with, and they work. And he's buried in Schoolcraft Cemetery, right over here. He's a World War I veteran. And that's one thing. So somebody asked him about being in the war, and he said, "Well, I had to go overseas, and I was in France, and I came home." They said, "That's all he brings." He says, "Well, I learned I never wanted to leave Vicksburg," and he never did again. So when we first moved here, we were told Vicksburg was the center of the universe, and I guess it kind of is. Okay. This is the guy with the art. I stole this off the internet, but these are the things he does. I've never spoken to the man. I don't even think he knows I'm giving him free advertising, but I was, if you look up fishing in Vicksburg, he comes up on Google. So. Okay, now this is the South County News. And this is the magazine we're passing around. I thought it was so funny that this picture is just a little different than the other one. And I'll tell you, if I caught 2 nice pike like that, there would probably be 8 pictures. It wouldn't be 2. So. Okay, fishing today in Vicksburg, not all fun and games. Fecal overload and nitrogen runoff. I noticed this year we've taken care of the geese over at the beach. And I haven't heard one summer warning about swimming advisory. So maybe it was the goose poop that was the problem. But we have red crayfish. And there's only 2 places in Michigan that they found them. One is over by Novi in a retention pond, and here. And they think what happened was somebody was using them for bait. They got done fishing and they just dumped the bucket. Well, these are pretty aggressive and they're pretty prolific. I haven't heard another word about it since it happened. I don't know if people quit during COVID. We weren't able to do a lot of stuff. And invasive plants. A lot of the plants in Sunset Lake that are invasive are from people's fish tanks. They'll go out and they'll buy a goldfish. Well, let's put a piece of milfoil in there for fishy to have. Well, you get rid of the goldfish. You also pitch the milfoil. Well, this is a great place for it to grow. These are just some headlines that I picked out. And again, I stole this off the website, but it shows them harvesting the weeds out of the lake. And they dig them up, and then they take them over behind Prudential Nursery, and they turn them into compost. I don't know if Prudential bags it up or they'll let you go back there and take what you want. I don't know. And there's the crayfish. You can notice how much bigger they are than a regular crayfish around here. And in Louisiana, they really encourage these fish because these are the ones that they eat. These are the ones you get from Thailand too, I'm pretty sure. Now, I took this out of the newsletter, but they were talking about there are 25 ice fishing shanties out on Sunset Lake, and they were complaining about all the trash. And they put sportsmen in quotation marks, which I thought, but it said by the year 2000, the lake will be filled with litter, but these sportsmen will be gone. Well, I think we made it, but I think we made it because everybody started picking up stuff. That's one thing. There's a lot of lakes I fish on ice fishing, and a lot of people, you know, they leave the little ones on there. You know, it isn't really clean. Well, Sunset Lake, I don't know if there was a town meeting or what, but you go out there in March and check the ice, and it's pretty clean. I mean, people are pretty conscientious about picking things up. So maybe this morning in 1960 is still resonating. Okay, now I put this in, master anglers. The state of Michigan, if you catch a fish that's a certain length or bigger, you get a patch, master angler patch. So I was curious, and this is a great tool, by the way, because you can put in Kalamazoo County, and let's say you want to catch a big crappie, okay? Well, where do they catch the big crappies? Well, you Kalamazoo County crappie, and then put 1994 to 2019, and hit search, and it'll tell you every lake. Well, it's amazing how many times Austin Lake came up. So if I was looking for big crappies, I would go there in Kalamazoo County. You can do it for any county. I wanted to catch a master angler rock bass. Well, the best place, my dad's in heaven turning over because I'm telling all his secret spots, but he didn't tell me his good mushroom spot before he passed away, so anyways, great place, St. Joe River from Mendon to the launch site, especially the launch site. There's a lot of debris that's caught on the railroad track bridge. Fish upstream and just let your minnow drift in. You'll get some, or a number 16th ounce jig with a white curly tail. Pretty simple. You will catch them. Sorry, Dad, I had to do it. Okay. For instance, this is bluegills. They said Gordon Neck Lake. All right, there's a disclaimer to this. My dad worked at the Kalamazoo Gazette, and he worked with a guy who worked in the sports department called Bob Wagner. And Bob Wagner had a column called Just Bobbing Around, but he also ran the fishing contest for the Kalamazoo Gazette. And he used to get so frustrated with people from Vicksburg because people would come in, they'd have their fish, they'd get them measured, they'd get them weighed, and they'd say, "Where did you catch this?" And they would say Gun Lake, or they would say Sherman Lake, or they would say Lake Michigan. I mean, he said people from Vicksburg would never, he said, "Come on, you got all those lakes down there, you gotta be catching." No, I caught this. Oh man, way over. Palmer Lake was another big one. So I can't imagine all the people in Kalamazoo that drove down to Palmer Lake, and they could have just stopped here. But that's why these are suspect. These, and all of these at Indian Lake. And another, boy, if you have a friend at Indian Lake, cultivate that friendship too. That's a hard lake to get on, unless you know somebody. Unfortunately, I don't know anybody. And then, but these are the only two I could find for Sunset Lake. And they were 1994, so I don't know if this information is going to help you or not. But, and they caught them in, what was that, July and May. May 28th, that was opening day. But there, this is almost 9 pounds, 24 inches long. That's a big fish. Okay, and then when I talked about positive things at the 1875, one of them was fish stocking. And this is the only 3 plants I could find around here, and they were at Indian Lake, and they were all private. And then this one I include because it's the white perch, and we thought they were gone. They're starting to come back big time on Lake Erie now, and they're worried that they're going to outcompete the yellow perch. They're a native fish, you know, they're not invasive. But the reason I included this was that when I told you that day, my cousin Jack and I went out and we saw those carp at Barton Lake. Well, he was working on a project. He was in college then, and he was working on a project for Western Michigan University, and he wanted to get one example of each species of or freshwater fish in Kalamazoo County. And we caught a white perch that day in Barton Lake, and you'd have thought he'd have caught Moby Dick. I mean, he was just so pumped. And but that's the last one I heard of around here, a recorded catch of a white perch. So, and Barton Lake of all places. So, trying to remember. Okay. My wife made me put that in. I'm done. Thank you. Any questions?
The red crayfish, what other crayfish? I live on Long Lake, and I started to get these up just 2-3 feet in from the shore of these holes, so he said it's crayfish.
Yeah.
Are those, there's one, not red ones, but they're not fun either, what are they?
If the bigger the hole, the odds are it's a red crayfish.
So they may be up there too, huh?
Yeah.
Probably like that, I don't.
Oh yeah, if you have a pond, I know everybody warned me about muskrats. I have a pond, and they said, well, muskrats will get in all this stuff. Well, I took out the muskrats. Yeah.
I keep paying but they see.
Yeah, yeah. I found out the best way is just put an ounce of lead right behind your ear at about 1,200 feet per second. Yeah.
Sneak your eye out.
Yeah. Well, anyways, the holes stayed, so I made I made a crayfish trap, and that's what I caught. So, yeah, but they were the natural ones.
I never see them. You know, all I see is the hole afterwards. So.
Yeah, just get a crayfish trap and
It's
put a little
damn
bit.
thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Muskrats in the winter, their den is under the seabed, under my dock. They come up under everything, and then just under the snow, they just devastate my yard.
Yeah,
They haven't gotten my boat wires, thank you, like everybody else. But that third eyeball would just be beautiful.
well, since we took care of the muskrats, the woodchucks have decided to pay it.
It's always something.
It's always something, yeah.
Trade-off is getting to live on the lake, so it's all good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
We would catch a white perch lately on the Pettawag up at Port Crescent.
Really?
Quite a bit, yeah. Where? Port Crescent.
Port Crescent, yeah. Well, that's funny you say that. We lived on the Pennybog River when I was up in the Thumb.
My father was born in Port Austin.
Oh my gosh, what's your name?
Stokowski, who lives on the farm.
Hi.
Dwight Township, Milton Farm.
Okay, well, if it ends in an SKI, yeah, you're from here on down. Yeah, that was the big joke. When I started teaching up there, I was looking at the class list. I thought there was, I taught 6th grade for 2 years and then high school for 5. I was at North Huron in Kindy. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
Port Austin, I lived, oh geez, I don't know well, M25, you know,
Right.
where it comes out of town. Yeah, we lived there for a couple of years, and
We have a place there.
oh my gosh, this world's getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Well, next time you go up, let me know, because I've got friends up there that I can send stuff up. That'd be great.
All right.
Yeah, Randy, we talked about the book here, we get this from the DNR, it's a guide to eating safe fish. They don't sell it with the proclamation, but on the history of things, I mean, you open this, it's a certain place, it's a pretty good question. You can't open it up to any watershed without finding restrictions on everything. In fact, most cases, you can't eat your limit in a week.
Right.
You know. So, but in your past, looked at the history of the area, what kind of impact did chemicals have on, for example, Portage Creek or any of these waterways? Is there kind of recorded?
Well, people are, I grew up on Bank Street in Kalamazoo, just by the farmer's market. So until I was 30 years old, when people said Portage Creek, well, the Portage Creek looked like this. It was white. There were no fish. It stunk. And we had 3 paper mills upstream, and the Panelite Company, which was kind enough to put PCBs into the water. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of environmental consciousness in Kalamazoo. In fact, when I was in 6th grade, there was a guy, he owned one of the paper mills, I think the Bryant Mill, and he wanted to convert the Kalamazoo River into what he called an industrial river. He said, we'll keep these rivers clean, but the Kalamazoo's so dirty, let's just keep it industrial, and didn't go anywhere, thank goodness, but I mean, that's, well, today, I know they lowered the dam, Morrow Dam, and let all that sediment downstream, and they say it's going to take decades before that washes down to Kalamazoo Lake there in Allegan, and I don't know, look out Saugatuck, because it's coming your way. You know? No, when I was in college, we used to take a rowboat, and we would go on Arcadia Creek, where three ponds is, and then we'd take it down to Portage Creek. And Arcadia Creek was okay, but when you got to Portage Creek, it looked like the bottom of a swimming pool. It was white, gray. So we used to go upstream then, and then we would take rakes, and then we'd break that crap up off the bottom and let it go on downstream. And boy, you talk about a worthless effort and an impossible cause, but I felt better at night for doing it. So.
Well, you've seen that PBS special on, it was an award-winning special on the St. Joe River. In fact, they played it at Covered Bridge Farm down there south of.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yesterday. And it's really a fascinating history of the St. Joe. I didn't realize the St. Joe at one time went into the Kankakee River and went into Illinois. And then there was sort of a flood thing, and it diverted it back up to Lake Michigan.
Yeah, we had a lady stop in the Historical Society, and she lived at Indian Lake. They just bought a cottage, and she wanted to know where that Portage River went. And I said, well, where do you want to go? Because I mean, once you get on it, you just take it right on down to, well, Portage Lake, St. Joe. There's a dam at, well, I don't know, Constantine, and
There's one in Three Rivers, too.
yeah, I mean, at Berrien Springs, there's 3 in South Bend. But if you make all those portages and you can make it to Lake Michigan, you can go north and come out at the St. Lawrence, or you can go west at Chicago Shipping Canal. Oh, that's the other thing. I didn't include that slide, and I should have. But I just read this. It's in Michigan History this month. And the article is about eels. And I got reading it. Well, in 1875, they polled people on, okay, we're going to stock fish. What do you think would be a good idea? Well, number one, big time, was brook trout. Everybody wanted brook trout. Number two was eels in 1875. And it turns out that what happened, these boats would go on the Great Lakes, and a cheap way to feed your sailors is to get a barrel full of eels. You don't have to put much water in there, and they stay alive. And then by the time they got to Chicago or wherever they were going, they could get something real to eat. They would just dump the eels out. So, and this started in 1844. So the eels, that's a whole nother hour. But the interesting thing to me was that they complained about the eels. They used to get caught in the mill race right here in Vicksburg. Then eventually people.
Seilheimers, or are they something different?
These are different. These are native species. They belong here. But they spawn out in the Sargasso Sea, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So this was, if they got dumped here or planted here, they did well. But then when it was time to spawn, they'd look for salt water. Well, they would just head right on out, just like my bluegills leaving my pond. They'd head out, and they'd head right for the Sargasso Sea, and then they would spawn there. And then when they come back, all they look for, they aren't like salmon. They're just looking for fresh water. So they could go up Chesapeake Bay, they could go up the Hudson River. The odds were really good they weren't going to make it back here. You know? That would have been a long, long trip. But I guess they're great eating. That's what I hear.
Is the white perch thriving in Lake Erie like good news for Lake Erie? It seems like they've got so
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Is the white perch thriving in Lake Erie good news for Lake Erie? It seems like they have
Oh,
so
yeah.
many problems.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like they have to be able to make a living, literally.
Yeah, what was it? The Cuyahoga River caught fire in Cleveland. I mean,
Isn't that amazing?
that's what I say. I mean, I'm 74 years old. It's amazing how much better things have gotten. I mean, if you look at the way it was when I was 12 years old, you'd have thought, we're all dead. We're not going to make it, you know? Well, when I used to fish, I used to have to get on my bike from Bank Street, and I had to go all the way to Millen Park, or I had to go, you think my mom will see this? I could still get in trouble, I think, for a lot of the places I went on my bike. But yeah, we used to go out Oakland Drive. There was before they built all those houses back there, Oakland Drive and Hillenbrook. Oh, that was great. There were a lot of little ponds back there. They were all you could catch all the fish you wanted. Then they started building and went away. And I've asked a couple times to go fishing there, and people really don't want me in their yard. So, okay.
Yeah, I'm as old as you are, and I would be correct. The St. Clair River and the Lake St. Clair and Detroit River were so polluted. You catch a perch out of there, it just didn't taste good. You know, and they just done such a fantastic job.
Yeah.
They built something over the years.
Zug Island and all that wonderful.
Oh, yeah, that's even part of it. They really did a good job on cleaning all that up. Lake St. Clair is just a fantastic fishery. Biggest smallmouth bass in the world.
Yeah.
It's amazing how nature can come back and put them through some. Yes, exactly.
I know we were laughing about that the other day, or I was, that the Guinness Book of World Records, they're not going to keep any records now that involve taking wildlife. And the world record is for largemouth bass in a year is 3,000 something. And this guy was a retired school teacher, so he had time and means. And I got thinking about that, and I don't keep great records, but I do keep some records. And I went back, and I had 5 days in a row on the Kalamazoo River where I caught 100 bass. And I got thinking, you know, you extrapolate that, you don't have to fish a whole year to catch 3,000 bass. And that's just on the Kalamazoo, from the dam down to Comstock. I've done 50, 60 bass a day on the St. Joe. got to be a little careful because the locals down there aren't real good in sharing either. So I,
Yes, I know.
okay.
But this young man here, he can catch fish in a sewer.
Really?
He can catch fish.
Do you do any guided trips? 'Cause-
Just take down his license.
okay. Well, appreciate you coming out. Thank you.